In an organization owning the best and scariest talent in the world, Romero stood out. A two-time Olympian, Romero's greatest achievement in wrestling was claiming a silver medal against Russia's Adam Satayev, going into the tournament with high expectations after defeating former Olympic champion Hasdamirav Magomedov at the previous year's World Wrestling Championship final. Romero had a bad start, with the Russian bringing him to the mat, only to be pinned outside the 3-minute mark. After a decorated career, Romero finished wrestling in Germany, where he was competing and teaching for SV Johannes Nürnberg. Romero would transition his skills to MMA, where he would win his first 4 fights by knockout before signing with Strikeforce, where he would lose to the dethroned middleweight champion Rafael Cavalcante. Following the merging of the UFC and Strikeforce, Romero would win knockout of the night, after landing a devastating flying knee in the first round, announcing himself on the world stage. Yoel would win his next 6 fights, and after a controversial split decision over former ADCC winner and Strikeforce champion Ronaldo Souza, Romero faced former champion Chris Weidman in a number 1 title contender fight. Weidman would be the first one to shoot, with Yoel managing to keep the fight standing. They stood at range, where Chris found success with his kicks, even managing to ground the Cuban before he popped back up to his feet. In the second, Weidman tried to keep a high pace while Romero looked for opportunity. Romero showed his athleticism, staying upright as Weidman tried to take him down off a caught kick. The two men clinched, with Yoel landing a trip and attempting to take Weidman's back. The All-American would be forced to defend the Cuban's wrestling for the rest of the round. After 2 hard kicks in the third, Yoel would perfectly time a flying knee, cutting Weidman and ending the fight. Current middleweight champion Michael Bisping's injuries meant that Romero would face Whittaker for an interim title, in which he would have become the second oldest champion in UFC history at 40 years old. The next 6 months would see GSP win the title from Bisping, retire, and Whittaker injure himself ahead of his fight with Luke Rockhold for the now vacant belt. Romero would re-enter the title picture, replacing Whittaker for an interim belt against Rockhold. Romero would get the biggest knockout of his career, pressuring an off-balance Rockhold into the corner before dropping him with a huge left hand. The Cuban had re-established himself as the number 1 contender, and would face Whittaker not 4 months later, after a second loss to Whittaker, this time by split decision. Many thought this would be the last we would see of the 43-year-old Romero. However, 16 months later, he was back against one of the scariest middleweight prospects at the time, an undefeated Paulo Costa. Romero landed a good head kick early on, exploding into a takedown, before Costa scrambled to his feet. Costa then dropped Romero, only for Romero to do the same seconds later. After Costa found success boxing Romero against the fence, Romero pushed forward, landing a flying knee. The Cuban would shoot for a takedown, only to be stuffed by Costa, who unloaded on Romero, only for Yoel to explode back to his feet, catching Paulo on the way up. Costa landed some big body shots, only for Romero to explode back with his own answer. Yoel managed to catch Paulo moving in again before the end of the round. Costa came out in the second, picking his shots well and keeping the forward pressure, catching him with some nice hooks early as he backed Romero up against the fence. Yoel managed to find some success pumping his jab as Costa caught his breath. Yoel shot a successful takedown at the close of the round, attempting to get some points back on the scorecard. Romero stood in boxing range, landing a nice uppercut early. Romero stopped backing up as much and found some success in the middle of the round. Romero began to back up Costa before inviting him back to the middle of the octagon, where the two men exchanged. Both men gave it everything, slanging and banging to the last second, with Yoel landing a tired takedown. After losing in the eventual fight of the night, Paulo Costa had established himself as the number 1 contender. However, a bicep injury would keep Costa out for 8 months. With the constant doubt over champion Israel Adesanya's wrestling ability, he requested a matchup against the Cuban silver medalist despite his losing record. With the pay-per-view success of Yoel Romero and his knack for exciting fights, Dana White agreed and the fight was booked for March 2020. Adesanya came out cautious, attempting to pick at Romero from the outside. Yoel caught Israel with a big right hand as Adesanya began to chop away at his legs. Romero tested Israel's chin early in the second with a huge overhand as Adesanya closed the distance, forcing him back to kickboxing range, where the Nigerian continued to chip away at Romero's legs. As the fight dragged on, both men stayed reserve, both managing to find some success with kicks in the third. Referee Dan Mergliata called the two men over before the fourth, asking them to give the judges something to score. Both men stayed patient, with Yoel managing to land a takedown, shooting for the first time in the fight. Romero attempted to close the distance and land, but Israel was able to keep him back, circling out and landing more heavy leg kicks. Yoel caught Adesanya again early in the fifth, with another dangerous overhand left. Romero started to fight with some form of urgency, coming forward and throwing more. However, Adesanya was able to circle out and return fire. For a fight with so much potential, it fell flat, and much of the debate ended up being over who won the fight, with Romero landing the bigger shots, but Israel bringing the volume. With the UFC forced to make cuts during COVID, Yoel's high salary, failure to capture a title, and old age saw him cut from the promotion. Yoel Romero was quickly snapped up by Bellator, one of the largest MMA promotions with an impressive roster, to compete in their light heavyweight division. The 44-year-old will debut this weekend against former UFC contender Phil Davis, who just lost his last fight to Bellator champion Vadim Nemkov. Davis has never been finished in his career despite facing an impressive roster of talent. His patient and low-risk style is a double-edged sword that can sometimes lead to inactivity. This fight will be a test of Yoel's explosive style. If he can close the distance, he can cause Davis problems. I'm excited to see what this move to light heavyweight will mean for Romero's career, and I'm interested to see how long this future Hall of Famer can fight at this level for.